Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, July 21st meeting of the Calabasas Communications and Technology Commission. Welcome, and we appreciate your attending from outside and in this new Zoom environment. We're all Zooming all the time, so welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. It looks like we have all 5 commissioners here. And I'd like to have someone volunteer to, somehow all my pictures disappeared. I'd like someone to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Who might that be? Oh, there you go. Michael Klein, would you lead that, please?
Sure. Everyone face the flag. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
nation
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Are we going back to the pictures where I can see everyone?
It might be your display, Candace.
Pardon?
It might be just your display. You can click between individual and grid.
I don't know where to go because it was fine a minute ago.
Very top right-hand corner of the screen on mine, there's a little series of dots. That'll make it individual or grid.
Huh.
The gallery view versus a speaker view.
Yeah.
Okay, gallery view is what I want, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, I'm back. Thanks, everyone.
Good.
If something can go wrong, it will, right? Okay, the first item up is an approval of our agenda. Has everybody checked it out?
Yeah.
Any questions, comments?
No, so moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Why? We have to do a roll call on this one or no? I guess not. Okay.
Rachel, we don't have to do roll call, right? Okay. Okay, has everyone read the minutes from our last meeting in April?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Are there any changes, comments? Anyone?
Nope.
They may have a motion to approve.
Approve. Motion.
Motion second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have announcements or introductions for us tonight? I have one, but do the rest of you have any?
I just had one brief one.
What is it?
Oh, just that I wanted to commend communications on getting out the alerts. So they're spread out so much more, like on Nextdoor. I think it's great that they're getting out and they're getting out quickly. So I just wanted to commend Michael and his team.
Oh, I agree.
Thanks, Richard.
What I wanted to say is I wanted to thank our student commissioner, Rachel Rosenblatt. She sent me this lovely email thanking me for the opportunity of being on the commission with us, and she's off to college in August. So this will be her last meeting with us. And Rachel, we really thank you for your participation and your enthusiasm and your joy of learning. That's really important.
Where are you heading, Rachel?
I'm going to USC in the fall.
Oh, how terrific.
Congratulations.
Very nice.
Thank you.
So I just wanted us all to give a chance to thank Rachel and wish her well, and hopefully she'll keep in touch and let us know how things are going. Would you do that, Rachel?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess we'll be looking at finding another student commissioner for sometime soon. Not that you can be replaced, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else have any announcements? Okay, I don't know how I would get any cards for speakers from the outside, but I don't see any. Has anyone, how are we handling that?
Attendee, and if that person would like to speak on the item after staff presents, they can raise their hand. They may just be here to listen to the item, but I'll keep an eye on if that person would like to speak.
Okay, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. Okay, so we'll, you're saying that we'll do public comment after the discussion? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think there's 2 rounds of public comment. One would be the general public comment on items not on the agenda, which it would, I think, be in order to take now if there is any. And then second, it'd be comment on the agenda item as it comes up, particularly the wireless item number 1. And I understand from looking at the Zoom system, we're not seeing anyone wishing to speak at this time. If there is anyone who wishes to speak, now is the opportunity, and to use the raise hand feature in the Zoom system to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification, Matt. We're all kind of learning as we go along with this new format.
It is a new world.
Okay, so let's go on to our discussion item tonight, which is a discussion of options to amend section 17.12.050 antenna wireless communication facilities of the Calabasas Municipal Code. I understand that staff is going to do that presentation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, have at it.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Tonight we're discussing wireless service in Calabasas, specifically deciding whether to get the ball rolling on updating the city's wireless ordinance. Now, a lot of this started with the November 2018 Woolsey fire, of course, and residents' complaints about the inability to use their cell phones during the disaster. But complaints about poor cell service in the city really do predate the Woolsey fire. Tonight, the commission is being asked to provide some direction to the city council. Specifically, staff recommends approving a draft memo from the CTC to the city council with recommendations to update the wireless ordinance. Now, just a little bit of background. You may recall a few months ago, I made a presentation to you outlining our survey of residents to get their thoughts on cell service in the city. We received more than 1,000 responses from people living inside Calabasas city limits. And you may remember the survey results showed a lot of dissatisfaction with current cell service, and also an apparent willingness to increase the number of wireless facilities in the city and even in neighborhoods in order to improve that service. So with that as a springboard, if you will, I'd like to call on Michael Klein, I'm Senior Planner in the Community Development Department, to go into more detail on the recommendations. Michael?
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. Good evening, commissioners. I want to, before I begin, I just want to mention that we are also joined on this meeting tonight by Jacqueline Kramer, who's planning assistant in the planning department, and she's been working with me on the ordinance as well as handling wireless applications that have been coming in. I checked tonight, we have 7 small wireless facilities permits that are currently being processed by Jacqueline, as well as 5 minor mod permits. That being said, none of those are for new facilities. Those are all effectively upgrades to existing sites. So Jacqueline's been handling wireless permits, including those that are currently pending with the planning department. So she's very familiar with these types of facilities. We also have Jonathan Kramer on with us tonight, who we all know is our wireless expert, and he is here to help us. He's joined us on the subcommittee meetings to discuss the issue at hand. And in addition to that, we have Matt Summers, assistant city attorney, who is our legal expert and advice regarding pretty much everything for the city, but for tonight specifically wireless facilities. So with that, I think I hopefully have the ability to share my screen. So I'm going to open up a PowerPoint presentation. I'll try and get through it as efficiently as possible. Let me start it up here. And hopefully it'll give the CTC a little bit of background of ultimately what we're what we're here trying to do tonight. So with that, the first thing I just want to cover for the CTC's benefit is what the CTC's review authority is. So if you remember in section 17.76 of the Municipal Code, the CTC actually acts as a planning commission for all wireless related projects, as well as the reviewing body for considerations of any amendment to section 17.12.050 of the Calabasas Municipal Code, which is the city's wireless ordinance. The main thing that I do want to make sure that we are all aware of here is that tonight, this is just a discussion. We are not proposing any changes to the ordinance at this time or adoption of any sort of new ordinance. So it's a discussion for the CTC. And ultimately, my goal here, or the purpose of this meeting, is to provide the CTC with an overall analysis of our existing wireless ordinance and recommendations that have been discussed with the subcommittee on how to address the wireless ordinance in order to remove hurdles for deployment of wireless facilities within the city. I don't want to necessarily go through the background and echo what Michael Russo had mentioned in terms of the survey. We know from the survey that the direction from City Council, and then also when the CTC looked at the survey results a few months ago, the direction has been for the city staff and the city attorney and Jonathan Kramer to look at ways to expand our ordinance in order to address safety issues and concerns related to lack of reliable wireless service within the city. So if you think about it, the purpose of an ordinance sets the limitations and restrictions for which carriers have to follow. And it's not just wireless facilities, the zoning code regulates all sorts of things. In this particular case, we're talking about wireless facilities. It effectively sets the table, and then from there, the carriers have to decide whether or not they want to come to that table and deploy their facilities within the city. So if that table is set in a way that is not desirable, then a carrier is not going to want to deploy new facilities within the city. Conversely, if you have a big buffet for wireless carriers to come to the city and deploy their infrastructure, then maybe you get more facilities that way. So ultimately, the goal here is for the CTC to develop recommendations to the City Council that can be used to update the ordinance. And like I said, the point is that we would then forward those recommendations to the City Council. So as part of the staff report, staff has prepared a draft memo, and the purpose of that memo is to memorialize recommendations from the CTC to the City Council. And then from there, if based on the memo, or not based on, but if the CTC adopts a memo, whether at this meeting or at a future meeting, staff would then forward that memo to the City Council for official direction. So as of yet, we have not been told by the council how they want the ordinance to be updated. That's kind of what CTC's role is to look at the ordinance and then provide recommendations to the City Council. And then if the City Council so moves, then they would direct staff to actually move forward with the process of updating the ordinance. And at that point, that would trigger the whole public hearing process. So tonight's meeting was not a public hearing because no official decision is being made. But if we are directed by council to update the wireless ordinance, then staff would move forward with that effort, which includes a public hearing process. And that process would also include public and industry outreach. So we believe that it's important to do some outreach to the public, primarily starting with like HOAs and other decision makers to get their sense on the direction of the wireless ordinance, as well as industry representatives to make sure that ultimately the goals that both the CTC and the council have stipulated are actually practical within the boundaries of the ordinance that we're considering. So with that kind of long intro, I'll go into a quick background of the city's wireless ordinance. The current ordinance, which is part of section 17.12.050 really dates back to 2012. So in 2012, the City Council adopted ordinance number 2012-295, and that was effectively a very comprehensive update, if not really a brand new wireless ordinance. Prior to that, the ordinance that had been utilized by the city was previously updated in 1998. And so in 2012, the Planning Commission, the CTC, and then the City Council reviewed the prior wireless ordinance, and then ultimately move forward with an update, a very comprehensive update, which is effectively the ordinance that what we have right now. In 2014, the ordinance was modified just very slightly based off of a court order. For anyone that is not aware, after the city adopted the ordinance in 2012, we were challenged. A lawsuit was brought against the city. I don't remember all the specific details, but the complaint was that the city's ordinance violated various sections of the as well as
Sorry, guys.
So after that, based on the court ruling, we had to make some minor modifications to the ordinance. And then after that, in 2015, we updated the ordinance to include a process for minor modification permits. That stems from a regulation that was put into effect in the 2012 Jobs Tax Relief Act, or Jobs Act, and I'm blanking on the name at the moment. But back in 2012, Congress passed an act, and within that act, it included a requirement that cities shall approve and may not deny a request to modify an existing wireless facility, as long as that modification is not a substantial modification. Unfortunately, Congress did not include defined terms of what was considered substantial. And then finally, several years later, the FCC adopted rules and guidelines that stipulated what's considered a substantial modification. So based off of that, we updated our ordinance in 2015 to provide for a process under the minor modification permit based on the FCC rules as well as Congress's rules. And then most recently, I believe everyone on this commission was here at the time, but in 2019, we updated the ordinance again to include a process for small wireless facility permits. And this was a requirement by the FCC, which requires cities to, again, have a different process or a more streamlined approach to permitting small wireless facilities. And I won't get into the details of it, but their definition of small may be different than other people's definition of small, but those are the rules that we have. So I guess I'm bringing all this up to kind of point out that, yes, we had a comprehensive update in 2012. However, at the same time, it has sort of become somewhat of a Frankenstein of an ordinance over the years because it has been modified based off of various legal requirements. So with that being said, as I mentioned, section 17.12.050 of the Calabasas Municipal Code is our wireless ordinance. This ordinance regulates all wireless facilities, and it includes those within the public right-of-way. And I bring that up because not all jurisdictions in the planning code regulate wireless facilities in the public right-of-way, because that's typically the domain of the Public Works Department. So in our city, though, if a carrier proposes to install a wireless facility in the right-of-way, they still have to go through the planning department and get the appropriate entitlements. What are those entitlements? Those entitlements, there's 3 entitlements that we have in the ordinance currently. That's a wireless telecommunication facility permit, a minor modification permit, as I was just talking about, and then a small wireless facility permit. The wireless telecommunication facility permit is effectively a discretionary permit, requires findings to be made by the CTC. The minor modification permit and small wireless facility permits are staff level permits, so those decisions are made by staff, and those are non-discretionary permits. They still have findings, but those are objective findings. And then finally, our current ordinance also regulates satellite dishes and radio antennas. So it's within the realm of technology, but there's sort of these sections that are a little bit different and obviously more unique than specifically wireless facilities. So back in 2012, it was the intent of the city council to apply the most restrictive rules applicable under both state and federal regulations for the construction of new wireless facilities, which is why we have the wireless telecommunication facility permit in our ordinance, and I'll get into that more later. And since the adoption of that ordinance in 2012, only one new wireless facility has been constructed within the city. And that's in comparison to approximately 30 new wireless facilities that were constructed in the 10 years prior to the 2012 ordinance. So ultimately the question is, why does that matter? Well, it matters because if the intent or the desire is to provide a more reliable wireless network, especially for the purposes of emergencies, then you have to have an appropriate infrastructure to accommodate it. And infrastructure can only exist through the deployment of wireless facilities. And there's a handful of reasons why reliability has gone down over the years based off of the current existing infrastructure. But I don't want to get into all of that stuff, only because our primary focus really as a police agency or a zoning agency is to focus more on aesthetics, time, place, and manner, and not so much on technology. So with that, staff at the direction of the CTC, staff, which includes myself and Jacqueline, Jonathan Kramer, Matt, and Michael Russo, we have been meeting with the subcommittee, Commissioner Brockman and Commissioner Melcher. And we have been discussing our wireless ordinance, and the purpose of those discussions is to identify what are the main issues that we all feel is contributing to the lack of deployment. Like I said, only one new facility in the past 8 years within the city of Calabasas. And so this slide highlights sort of the main issues at hand. And through the rest of this slide or PowerPoint, I'll go through each one of these sections. But just really quickly, the first one, which is process, really relates to what is it that a carrier has to do in order to deploy a facility, and whether or not the city's current processing requirement is restrictive, which then becomes a deterrent. The next two bullet points relate to specific restrictions within our wireless ordinance, such as where can a facility be deployed or constructed, i.e. we have prohibited locations, which means that they're simply not allowed in those zones. Now, of course, under the Telecommunication Act, ultimately, if they can prove that there's a significant gap in its least intrusive means, and we can't stop them from installing facility. However, just on the face of it, a prohibited location is not something that they would likely want to pursue unless they absolutely have to. And then we have this 1,000-foot setback from residential uses, schools, and parks. Again, that's a restriction that then limits the ability for a carrier to find a reasonable location to install a facility. And then the final bullet point gets down is organization in terms of how the ordinance is laid out. So with that, I'll jump right into the process. So as I had mentioned, we have 3 permit types. So with the exception of a small wireless facility permit, a wireless telecommunication facility permit is required for all new wireless facilities within the city. And a wireless facility permit is a discretionary permit subject to the CTC's review and approval. The findings require the applicant, among other things, to demonstrate that a proposed facility is the least intrusive means to close a significant gap in the carrier's coverage. And then we have additional findings that are required, which are the same findings that would be required for a conditional use permit. Ultimately, these are all subjective findings, meaning that there's not an objective standard that they have to meet. Ultimately, the CTC has to make these specific findings. Now, And then in addition to that, the process also requires a 30-day public hearing notice to all property owners within 1,500 feet. If, and the last wireless facility that was constructed under this ordinance was at the golf course, for example, and a 1,500-foot radius around the golf course resulted in, I think, about 2,500 notices that had to be sent out. The diameter of that radius was almost a full mile, just because of the size of the golf course. So question is here, why does this process matter? What makes this a hurdle? And as I had mentioned, what makes this process a hurdle to deploy a new wireless facility is that it's a discretionary permit, which is different from an administrative or a ministerial type of permit. So an administrative or ministerial type of permit is based on objective requirements, like a setback or a height limit. And whereas a discretionary permit, because it's more subjective, there's no guarantee that that permit will be approved. And so ultimately this becomes a business decision for a carrier. Now, to think about it for the carriers, from the carrier's perspective, when they decide to build a facility, there are multiple pieces that go into that, such as they have to conduct a site acquisition process. They then have to prepare plans and engineering documents. And then finally, they have to submit through entitlements. And that's just to find out if they can even build a facility. That takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And the best way that I can kind of put this in as a point of reference for everyone, as a homeowner yourself, let's say you decide that you want to build a pool in your backyard. Well, let's say, okay, I want to build a pool. I'm going to contact a contractor and get a contractor out here. Well, that contractor may tell you, just to put together all the plans and to do the necessary engineering documents, it will cost about $10,000 to get everything together and submit a package to the city of Calabasas to build a pool. Well, right now in the city of Calabasas, most of the time a pool is considered would require a zoning clearance application, which is a ministerial permit. So again, that there's objective requirements that a homeowner or a contractor or the pool would have to meet in order to be approved. And there's no subjectivity to it. If you meet a setback requirement and you meet your lot coverage requirements, then the pool will be approved by the planning department. So there's no question or concern that you're going to spend $10,000 to prepare plans, submit them to the city, and then not know if they're going to get approved. So on the flip side, if the city required a discretionary permit, like a conditional use permit for pools, then a homeowner may think, well, if I have to lay out $10,000 now and it's going to be submitted to the city, and I don't even know if that permit's going to get approved because maybe a commission might find that we don't need it, there's too many pools in the neighborhood, or my neighbor comes to a hearing and they complain that they don't want to hear my kids screaming in the backyard anymore because we have a pool. Well, now as a homeowner, you may decide you don't want to move forward with building a pool because you don't want to spend $10,000 to not know if you're even going to get a pool at the end of the road. So that's my example. I'm trying to just kind of put this in a frame of reference for homeowners and people that would think about development. So in the end, the wireless facility permit process, it's a good process for controlling development and especially for controlling undesirable types of wireless facilities. However, the main problem is that it doesn't encourage good facilities. There's no relief valve within our ordinance for a carrier to propose a fully stealth facility in a commercial zone or on an arterial road, the type of facilities that we would like to see be deployed in our community, because it's a one-size-fits-all permit process. So because of that, with the subcommittee, we were talking and we came to the conclusion that, and the subcommittee's recommendation is that we should consider establishing a 2-tier permit process. The tier 1 process would be an administrative permit process, does not require a public hearing, and it would be based off of objective standards. And it effectively would allow for stealth facilities within specific areas and zones of the city. For example, a commercial zone or even HOA-owned common area in our mind would be a good place for tier 1 type of facilities. As well as in the public right-of-way, arterial roads like Parkway Calabasas, for example, and collector streets, which are smaller roads that lead off of the larger roads. And then from there, a tier 2 facility would remain the same as our wireless facility permit. So now through that process, you would create you would keep the wireless facility permit process, which does what it was intended to do, but then you would also have another process or another permit that would encourage better deployment or more desirable facilities. So with that, I'm going to go into a couple of images for the CTC to look at and consider. And again, or not again, but the images that I put up on the screen, none of this is set in stone. These are really just images to provide the CTC with with an idea of what would be considered a tier 1 versus a tier 2 type of permit. And so if you look at this image, I have 3 different wireless facilities located in the city. This one is the Summit Shopping Center. And down here is an office building off of Agora Road. And then over here is a light pole on Parkway Calabasas. And so these are examples, good examples of fairly good wireless facilities where for the most part, especially at the Summit Shopping Center, that's the best example of a stealth facility where you don't see a single antenna or any equipment whatsoever. So in this particular case, all of the antennas are located behind this parapet wall. And that parapet wall is designed perfectly within the rest of the building. And then all the equipment is located on the roof, just like the rest of the roof mounted equipment for HVAC and other mechanical units. So that's in my opinion, that's a perfect stealth facility. Down here, you have another office building. Some antennas are mounted further up on the roof, but in this particular corner, the original wireless facility, which was constructed, I think, prior in the early 2000s, had antennas mounted just right on the outside of the wall. Because there's not a high parapet here, there's no ability to mount them behind the wall. So when they came forward with the modification several years later, we had them put a faux wall in front of the antennas. It's not a perfect example, but for the most part, this is on the backside of the building. When you're driving by on the freeway, I don't think most people even notice that there's a wireless facility there and that these antennas are back there. So it's still a pretty good example of a stealth facility. And then here on Parkway Calabasas, you have antennas within a radome on top of a light pole. All the equipment for this facility is located in an underground vault, so you don't have any ground-mounted equipment at this site. And it's located on Parkway Calabasas, which is an arterial road. And then, of course, these 2 buildings are located in commercial zones. So here's examples of, at least in my mind, what I would consider not to be a tier 1 or stealth type of facility. This one is located at the golf course. That's questionable, frankly. In this particular case, the one at the golf course at the country club is actually designed very well. Unfortunately, not all monopines are designed very well and are appropriately located. So that would ultimately be a judgment call on behalf of staff and CTC as to whether or not we would want to consider something like that as a tier 1 or not, and then create guidelines for that. Down here is a facility not too far from my house that is probably the worst example of a facility that we would want to see in the city of Calabasas, and it clearly would not qualify as a tier 1 facility. So if a carrier came in and proposed something like that, it would be subject to a tier 2 process, or under our current ordinance, just a wireless facility permit. And we would have a lot of discretion to deny a project like that. And then over here is a utility pole mounted facility. Again, questionable as to whether or not we would want that to be a tier 1 or not. It's really not the nicest facility out there, and it's very difficult to screen wireless facilities on utility poles, but this is also not necessarily done very well either. So again, these are all just images to give the CTC an idea of, you know, what we're talking about. If we want tier 1 type of facilities like these to be installed within the city, right now under our current ordinance, if a carrier came forward or proposed a new facility at the Summit Shopping Center identical to this, they would have to go through the same process that a carrier that wants to install this. And so there's really there's nothing that's driving a carrier to want to pursue good stealth facilities like these over here. So that's why we were talking about the tier 1 versus tier 2. And then of course, with that, our recommendation is that we would develop in concert with the CTC a set of design guidelines that would apply to a tier 1 type of facility. And so it would be a clear document that tells carriers, if you propose this would be considered stealth, and that would comply with a tier 1. And clearly the image in the middle of this screen would not qualify as a tier 1 type of facility. And then finally, with regards to process, we're also talking about location. So right now, part of the problem is that, and I'll get to it in a second, but wireless facilities are simply not allowed in residential zones. But that does not exclude public right-of-way areas, right? So there are, under California law, wireless carriers have access to the public right-of-way. So if there's no commercial area around, then they can still pursue a facility in the public right-of-way. However, the problem for Calabasas is that a big percentage of residential areas, which are far away from commercial areas, are also gated. And a gated neighborhood means that they own the streets. Therefore, the streets are no longer considered public right-of-ways, and therefore they're not open to a wireless carrier to install their infrastructure. So like the Ray Dome on Parkway Calabasas, they could basically install those right now under our current ordinance along Parkway Calabasas, but they can't install them on any of the streets in the adjacent neighborhoods because those are all gated and privately owned. So one of the ideas would be that a tier 1 permit would also stipulate from a location standpoint where a tier 1 facility could be located, and that would include things like commercial zones, public facility zones, and more importantly, residentially zoned areas that are both developed and owned by an HOA, and within the street infrastructure, areas that are, or roads that are either considered arterial streets or collector streets. And so on this particular map, the purple roads represent arterial roads. So these are like the main thoroughfares effectively through the city. And the green streets represent collector streets. So a tier 1 stealth facility could in theory be installed on this road up here or on these roads down here, which are inside a gated communities. So like the Paseo Primario traverses through Calabasas Park Estates and Calabasas Hills. But as a tier 1 permit, they would not be able to install a facility, whether in the right of way, or not the right of way, but in the streets for for the smaller cul-de-sacs. So again, these are just the ideas and recommendations that staff is coming up with. None of this has been completely fleshed out, but these are the ideas of where we would imagine a tier 1 versus a tier 2 permit heading. So then the next issue is the idea of prohibited locations. As I mentioned, under our current wireless ordinance, residential zones, including the streets within gated communities, are prohibited zones, as well as open space areas, and that includes any developed HOA common area. So I'll put up this map, which is, I think, in all the years I've known Jonathan, is probably one of his favorite maps. This map represents the black areas of the map represent all of the residential or open space zones in the city. So if a carrier wants to pursue a facility on private property, they're limited right now under our zoning, under the ordinance, to these commercial zones pretty much along Calabasas Road and along Agora Road. But if they want to reach some of these deeper residential areas, you could see they are all off limits. And that includes, like I had mentioned, the streets that are within the gated communities. So now, of course, in a non-gated community, they could pursue a facility in the public right-of-way. But again, that's not necessarily desirable either. I mean, we would prefer to encourage deployment within the commercial zones and public facility areas, and then also, as we're going to talk about, HOA-owned areas within residential zones. So ultimately, the recommendation is to look at opening up residential zones, but not open space areas. So a residentially owned property that's already developed and also under common ownership by an HOA is what we're talking about here. And so just as an example, that would include things like, again, the streets within a gated community, and then also their common areas. So you have, a developed pool that's under common ownership by an HOA, and you've got some structures around the pool. A structure like that would be a decent place to maybe build up and add a couple of antennas on top of. Or along the street, along the light poles, you can add antennas. Right now, under our current ordinance, those are prohibited. But our recommendation is that we consider opening up those residential areas. The important thing here is, number one, we're certainly not talking about undeveloped vacant land. We're talking about developed areas. And, again, down here, you have nice tennis courts, and maybe there's some 15-foot tall lights around the tennis court that you can install antennas on, or flagpoles somewhere around the tennis court. So there's more options in areas like these. They're not undeveloped. They are currently developed areas. But more importantly, right now, the HOAs have no choice because it's prohibited. So the idea is to allow the zoning code to open that up, and then the HOAs would have a choice, not forced to. So that's the important thing, is that an HOA still acts as a landlord. They can choose whether or not they want to allow a wireless carrier to be installed on their property. Right now, they can't choose that because our ordinance doesn't allow for it. And then finally, our wireless ordinance has a 1,000-foot setback for all new facilities from residential uses, schools, and parks. And so in this particular map, the red area represents approximately a 1,000-foot buffer around all of the residential and school and park areas in the city. And so you can see from this map that pretty much leaves a small area over here off of Las Virgenes and the freeway, and then a small area over here off of Calabasas Road, so like around the Commons and the office buildings across the street from the Commons. Those are pretty much the only commercial areas that are more than 1,000 feet from a residential zone. So this, again, becomes a big restriction to carriers because it leaves them very little options to pursue. So our recommendation here would be to eliminate the 1,000-foot setback for a tier 1 type of facility, because the idea is to develop a design standards for stealth facilities that the city wants in certain locations, in certain areas that the city has deemed acceptable. And that really only works if you eliminate the 1,000-foot setback. Now, we would still recommend maintaining the 1,000-foot setback for a tier 2 facility permit. And then finally is organization. Right now, as it's written, the wireless ordinance is a subsection of 17.12 of the municipal code, which is specifically geared towards standards for specific land uses. So this includes not just wireless ordinance, but it includes standards for things like residential accessory structures, accessory dwelling units, and alcohol sales, et cetera. There's about 20 or 30 different specific land uses that are contained within section 17.12. Most of these subsections are a couple of paragraphs and maybe, like in the case of an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, a few pages. The wireless subsection, however, is 26 pages long. And so that makes it very difficult to navigate, especially as you use it over the internet. So our recommendation here is to actually pull the wireless section out of section 17.12 of the municipal code and make it its own chapter. And that would be similar to like the city sign ordinance, parking ordinance, oak tree ordinance, etc. So it would have its own chapter, and then that would make it a lot more easy to navigate, both for staff, for the public, and also for applicants. And then within that, we would actually recommend keeping the satellite and personal radio antennas in section 17.12. So that way, the wireless ordinance really just stands on its own as its own chapter within the municipal code. This doesn't really fundamentally change a whole lot, but it was kind of like, well, if we're already in this process, this would make a big difference in terms of making it more user-friendly and easier to navigate. So with all of that, I will wrap it up with our summary and recommendations, which is currently included in the memo, the draft memo that was included in the staff report. Number one is to develop a 2-tier permit process. As I mentioned, tier 1 would be ministerial, tier 2 would remain the same as a wireless facility permit. The ordinance should allow for cell facilities in residential and open space zoning district, as long as those properties are also developed and under HOA ownership. Allow tier 1 facilities within 1,000 feet of residential uses, schools, and parks. Reorganize the ordinance so that the wireless ordinance is its own chapter in the municipal code, and then develop design and stealth guidelines for tier 1 facilities. And finally, it was a good recommendation raised by Commissioner Brockman and suggested by Jonathan Kramer, is that we consider adopting an ordinance with a 12 to 18-month timeline or time limit for the ordinance. And the intent there would be to both encourage deployment within a shorter period of time, because carriers, they wouldn't necessarily have the benefit of an ordinance that has no timeline, but also to recognize that if there are things about a new ordinance that we're not happy with, in 12 to 18 months, whatever time frame is chosen, it would revert back to the current ordinance. That being said, we would make sure that there's stipulations in there that would allow the ordinance to be extended, whether for another specified period of time or indefinitely afterwards. If everyone's happy with the ordinance. So with that, staff recommends the CTC approve Exhibit A, which is a draft memo from the CTC to the City Council, and it includes recommendations to update the current wireless ordinance. And again, that memo was included as Exhibit A in the staff report. So with that, I am available for questions. And yeah, thank you. Would you, actually, I think it's probably better for me to, if there are specific questions about the PowerPoint, I could leave the PowerPoint up right now. And then once we've gone through that, then I can turn it off so you guys don't have to stare at the screen anymore.
Are there any questions from the commission? Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question.
We're just talking about the PowerPoint, not the memo or anything like that first.
I don't know if this relates to the PowerPoint or if it's broader than that. I read through everything. One of my questions is, one of the things I think that discourages carriers from expanding into small communities like Calabasas is they don't make their money back. I was intimately involved in the construction of the site at Calabasas High School, which is exempt from, it's school property, so it's exempt from the city. This was before I was on the commission. It cost about $200,000 to put up the site that's on the football field at Calabasas High School. Has anybody ever thought about getting or encouraging multiple carriers to build on the same site? because I don't see any incentive. There's no economic incentive for a Verizon or an AT&T or now Sprint and T-Mobile or One for them to come in, because they're going to spend all this money and they're not going to ever get a return on it. But if you had all three carriers allowed to mount antennas on the same site, it might be economically much more viable if the city encouraged that.
And I can certainly respond to that. Our current ordinance actually does encourage and require carriers to stipulate that they would allow co-location on their facility. So I don't know if that's necessarily the issue. I mean, the reality is that at least in my experience with microcell sites, which is what we see more of in Calabasas, they're less likely to want to co-locate because the real estate is so little and limited. And again, in my experience with wireless carriers, I do believe that they want to spend money to build facilities within the city, you know, because there is a clear demand, and yeah, I have not heard a concern about that specifically. Their concern is they just don't necessarily want to go through the time and money and effort and then not really know if they can get a facility approved. If they can just go to LA County or Agora, where they know that it's an easier process, then they just go over there, because time and money are critical things for a carrier.
Yeah, probably money being at the top, is that's the business they're in, and they're entitled. You know. But yeah. I see what you're saying, Michael. I was just pondering the idea that maybe the city could encourage carriers to co-locate and therefore split costs, because our numbers are pretty small, and if you figure that any one carrier has maybe a third of the business, I don't see them ever making their money back on it.
One approach we could consider, if the CTC supported it, would be in looking at how to structure the tier 1 process to allow this certain kinds of stealth facilities to be approved on an easier path, would be to set a further encouragement for co-located facilities. Perhaps it's 5% more in height or 5% more in some other metric to facilitate co-locations as a further incentive process could be structured in the tier 1 process.
Incentive, I think, is what I'm going after.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a good idea, Matt, because that would, beyond the process, you need some sort of incentive that allows them to add the additional real estate to provide co-location.
Exactly.
Okay, Richard, is that it for a moment?
For the moment, yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a couple questions, if I may. You had talked about, it's probably in here and I may have missed it. You had talked before about notifying, like with the golf course, it was like 1,500 feet, and it sounded like notification was pretty onerous. With the memo, is it still notifying those living around the proposed site 1,500 feet, or is that going to be less than somewhat?
Well, so again, keeping in mind, we haven't really worked out all the details, but at least the intent of the tier 1 process would be that it's an administrative and ministerial permit. And so similar to a zoning clearance where someone wants to build a pool, we don't require them to notify anyone around them. They get a permit to build a pool. And the path of least resistance would to require no public notification. But again, that ultimately will be a decision for both the CTC and the City Council. It's not specified yet what we would require for a tier 1.
Okay.
And if I could add one more quick point on that, we certainly, all of the documents would be public record under the tier 1 approach. It wouldn't require affirmative notice from the carrier or the city out to the residents who live nearby, but any resident who is particularly concerned about wireless issues could file a standing request with the city to get a copy of applications and documents as they come in. So it would kind of shift. It would be more, if you will, an opt-in instead of an automatic in a way.
So in a sense, residents would not have, and I'm using this in quotes, like veto power. Like a group of residents couldn't go to the city hall and say, we oppose this tier 1 project. Okay. And then my other question is, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure. So within HOAs, if a board voted to approve, let's say near the tennis courts or on a tower, a pole, a light pole, a tall pole by the swimming pool, if the HOA board voted yes, that would be acceptable for tier 1, or how does that work? A little bit more clarification, please.
Yeah, in theory, the HOA board acting as the landlord of the common ownership would, I mean, mechanically, the HOA board would have to decide what they want to do. As long as the HOA signs the application form and agrees for the permit to be submitted on the city's end, that's all we're looking for, is to make sure that, number one, the property is currently developed. Number two, it's under common ownership. And number three, the HOA, as the landlord, has agreed to and allowed the carrier to submit that application. How the HOA decides to get to that point, that's up to the HOA. And again, that's a decision for the HOA. And the HOA could notify residents around a particular facility if they wanted to. I mean, just because the city's ordinance would not necessarily require notification, that doesn't mean that an HOA can't do their own level of notification.
And the other point is, in some cases, the conditions, covenants, and restrictions for the development will require the board to give notice to the members of the agency, to the homeowners, about what they're proposing. Other CC&Rs would not require notice. So each HOA will have to follow its governing documents, but the city won't be policing that. We will just require a signature from the HOA as property owner on the application.
Thank you.
Are there any others? Michael, you are muted.
No other questions.
No, there was, I think Michael Brockman had something, but he was muted. We have a plethora of Michaels.
You can't have too many.
I know, obviously, it's a good thing.
And Michael, you are muted.
Where is he? Where is he?
Generation.
Can we take down the PowerPoint so I can see everyone? Would that be okay? Thank you. Thank you, Michael Klein.
You're welcome.
Michael Brockman, you're talking, but you're muted. His lips are moving, but he's muted. Where'd he go?
Who is running the meeting? Whoever's running it can unmute him.
No, what happened is I have a problem with my mouse that sometimes disappears on me.
The mouse disappears?
You sound great now.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. A couple of comments. Remember that what is primarily driving this review, something that we haven't emphasized here tonight, which is the necessity for improving service to many of the residential areas of the city that have been blocked because of the various wonderful restrictions that I helped put together. But, and I think that with the diminution of use of hard lines, and that many families are strictly using the cell phones at this point, we really have to look for safety reasons at finding ways in which to enable their cell phones to function under normal circumstances, let alone emergencies. So that's what some of these issues that are coming up, which are all valid, we will need to vet when we get to doing this, because we do have a lot of details. But I think we've tried in this document to provide a new pathway, and one that will hopefully incentivize the wireless applicants to do what they claim they would be doing. We don't know what they will do. And that's why we put this time constraint on this document, or suggested a time restraint, because they know they will have a certain window of time in which to take advantage of the various options that we've opened up here, and that it's not there standing forever. It's just at this moment, a year or 18 months or whatever we come up with. So something to help motivate them to take some action on installing some new facilities that will help.
Thank you, Michael. I have a question on a particular item in the memo, the draft memo. There are no page numbers, so it's in the recommendations, number 3, where it says allow tier 1 eligible facilities to be constructed within 1,000 feet. And then tier 2 says the 1,000 foot setback would remain applicable to tier 2. So within 1,000 feet, what is that range? What is, how far off can they be from 1,000 feet? Does that make sense? What I'm trying to ask? Michael Klein, you're muted.
It's basically saying that we're not recommending to have a setback for tier 1 facilities from residential uses.
So no setback at all could be no setback at all.
It could be. That being said, we still do have some setback restrictions. For example, for a freestanding pole, we have a requirement that it has to be 150% of the height of the pole from the nearest residential structure. So we can still establish site-specific setback requirements, and the underlying setbacks for the zone would still apply. So if it's in a residential zone, it would still have to meet like a 10-foot side yard setback, for example. But a blanket setback is what we're talking about, that we should not apply for a tier 1.
Well, I just wanted to know if there was going to be a range. Dr. Kramer, go ahead.
I think it's important to jump in for a second and talk about what we're dealing with, which is current 4G technologies and technologies that are going to follow on. The whole issue of setback is an issue that we have to look at simply because the technologies that are already here and that are coming behind the current or coming next after the current technologies require the cell sites to be closer to the end users, specifically at home. So we're going to see the setbacks melt away because that's going to be technically necessary for them to accomplish their work of providing service.
Well, a lot of the setback grew out of the concern for the RF frequency stuff. Are you saying that's been resolved and nobody cares about that anymore, or?
Not exactly that no one cares about it anymore. I understand a number of residents still have that as a focus in their concern, and I appreciate that. However, Congress has seen fit to take that away from the city's list of concerns we can focus on. So just to repeat that, the federal government has said that the city cannot regulate on the basis of RF emissions. So I recognize that a number of our residents, and even some on this call, or the Zoom, may still be concerned or very concerned about radio frequency emissions. But the remedy for that, it lies with the federal government. The one exception is, as we did secure after the Crown Castle lawsuit in 2012, we can require the carriers to prove compliance through their affirmation with the federal standards for RF emissions, but we can't impose a setback concerned about RF emissions. But a setback can be focused on aesthetic impacts to the public rights of way into the communities. So we can certainly impose reasonable setbacks, and maybe, depending on where the discussion goes as we move forward, it might not be 0. It might be, 50 feet, 25 feet, 10 feet, something like that.
Yeah.
But as within the bounds noted by Dr. Kramer, that a lesser setback is going to be necessary for the technology to be useful, to meet the express goal of getting better service inside the homes.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just thinking, like, for example, I have a big corner lot, And I just have this picture of, an antenna on one side of my lot and an antenna on the other side, and I'm just ringed by these things. Is there that probably can't happen, right? We have two on one property, one residential property.
Well, actually, that is happening already.
Oh no, I mean,
And,
oh,
and to be fair, there are balances that the city has to work out in terms of location. And we can talk about, for example, two on one corner as being the last option. But there are sensitive issues, for example, sites that are mid-block, for example, will have even more impact potentially than one on a corner lot. So there are a lot of variables that get beyond the discussion here tonight, but I caution you that I don't think we want to think about ruling out anything at this point, as opposed to letting this process move forward to see where it takes us to improve communications in Calabasas.
no, I agree. I'm just wondering about things. I've been on the commission so long that a lot of these issues have come up over time, and
Yep.
and not having revisited in some years, it's nice to know what the current thinking is.
Well, I can tell you that the FCC, new FCC rules went into effect for RF emissions a month ago.
Oh, good.
And those rules are exactly the same that they adopted in 1997, with some minor tweaks to things that are not related to cell towers per se, but more related to the cell phones. So the FCC did complete its visitation of its rules. There's currently a lawsuit, by the way, filed against the FCC saying that its standards are inadequate. I want to tell you with absolute clarity that the way the FCC rules work is that if we were to permit a site under the current FCC RF standards, and the FCC RF standards got tighter, in other words, required less emissions, for improper ways or imprecise way of saying it, it would be the obligation of the carrier to meet those new standards. They can't claim grandfather or grandparent status. So as these issues are revisited, we're automatically protected. And if the commission were to ever try and say that old sites are somehow grandparented in, I'm sure that Calabasas would be amongst the cities leading the lawsuit against it.
Yeah, because, who knows, especially old sites, if they're not maintained well, what could be leaking? You just don't know. There's so many variables. Okay, anybody have any other questions or comment, discussion? Would someone like to make a motion that we do as staff requested, that we approve the draft memo?
I have a question, Candace.
Okay.
I would change very minor grammatical change in the first paragraph. Should I just mail that out or see if?
What is it?
About 4 lines down, it says, additionally, the survey results, that line?
Are you on Exhibit A?
Yes.
I don't see where you're talking about.
Woolsey Fire in November of 2018 period. Then next line is additionally the survey results.
Oh. What do you want to change?
I would change majority of respondents would be accepting of new wireless facilities in their neighborhoods. Right now, you've got respondents would be accepting of a new wireless facility, singular, in their neighborhood, singular. It should all be plural.
That's a very good catch.
Respondents.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Richard. Thank you. I didn't even think of that when I was reading it.
I can summarize that in the text and mail it out if you want.
Chair Weber, I'd like to make a motion that with including Richard Cassel's grammatical change, that we, the commission, approve Exhibit A, the draft memo to be approved tonight and to go to the city council with recommendations to update the wireless ordinance.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, good job, everyone. The subcommittee and the staff and Dr. Kramer, thank you so much. This is really, really an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
I'm
so
going to be leaving the meeting now. Thank you all. And I wanted to give a special thanks to the Jonathan and Matthew and Michael Klein and Michael Russo. And of course, Michael Brockman for all the hard work. And Jacqueline, where I've lost your picture. Thank you all for all this work.
Thank you.
And the real work begins now.
oh, Carrie, did you say you're leaving the meeting?
I am leaving the meeting right now.
Okay,
I mean,
okay, thank
all
you.
right, thank you all. See you
Thank
next
you.
month.
Okay,
And if you'll allow me, Madam Chair, in the interest of the city's budget and the times we face, I too would plan to depart unless you need me for any other items on the agenda. Thank you again to the subcommittee and to the commission. We look forward to implementing this process over the coming months.
okay, thank you, Matt. It was excellent having you with us. So, Dr. Kramer, what are you saying?
Well, I'm kind of in the same position as Matt, which is when I'm here, the city is being charged, and if there are no other items that the commission intends to ask me about, then I should probably excuse myself as well to benefit the city's budget.
What does everybody think?
Throw them out.
I love it.
Throw the bum out, right?
Well, in that case,
All right. Thanks all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Matt. Okay.
And likewise, I would recommend that Jacqueline and I
Yep.
log off to save bandwidth, not necessarily saving the city any money, but just saving you guys bandwidth on the Zoom
Well,
phone.
thank you for joining us, Jacqueline. It was nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice
And
to meet
Michael,
everyone.
thanks again for an excellent presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's good to see everyone.
It's good to see everyone.
Bye.
Okay, here we are. Okay, the monthly reports. Is that Rachel?
That is me. The city receives payments from Charter and still a check from Spectrum on a quarterly basis. All cable franchises are paid to date. The franchise fee information provided by the cable companies are confidential and proprietary. These items were emailed to you prior to the meeting. And this is an information item only and does not require any action at this time.
Rachel?
Yes, sir.
It's Michael B. Did you say you did send the data of the payments to
Yes,
us?
she did. She did, Michael.
Yeah, I
Oh, I
emailed it to everybody.
All right, I'll double check. I don't think I saw it, but. Oh,
Chair Weber, may I ask a quick question of Rachel?
Sure.
Okay. I think you mentioned once before, I noticed that there were a couple adjustments and subtractions on, I forget, what is that? How does that come about?
That's just a monthly, there's times where they'll be adjusted if there was an overpayment. They don't tell us what it is. It's just a fee adjustment based on numbers if they overpaid us. So it's not, I know this month there was, or this quarter there was none. It was previous year, the last year, fourth quarter, third quarter. I do see it, but they're fee adjustments that they put in their report for us.
Thanks.
Point of clarification. I was just reading through this. Do they still go by the name Charter? Or I thought everything was under the Spectrum blanket now.
Well, so the way the checks come are still, we get the two checks. So the one that used to be Charter, one that used to be Spectrum. It is based under one company, but they still come as the two separated companies.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, how about your cable complaint review, Rachel?
The city received 2 new complaints since our last meeting. Both of these complaints were internet complaints, and the residents were informed that the city has no authority regarding internet, but we would still file a complaint on their behalf, which seems to have worked in their favor. The first complaint, a resident called to inform us that she had made over 10 calls to Spectrum and could not get anyone to come fix the issue. I did suggest to her that she file an FCC complaint because she has had this issue in the past. She did so, and Charter did reply quite fast once they received that FCC complaint. There was a problem with her equipment. She was also credited to her account for the time that the internet was down. And I spoke with the resident after, and she was happy with the outcome of that complaint. The second complaint was an email received from a resident regarding internet issues. Multiple times the signal would cut out, the download speeds were not correct. Like I said, I informed the resident that we don't have any authority. He asked me to still file the complaint, which seems to have worked. A representative from construction side of Spectrum called him and verified everything that he had put in his email. They're waiting on a permit to be approved from SCE to split the signal into that neighborhood. They expected the work to be done sometime this month. Resident and Charter or Spectrum both informed me they would keep me up to date when this issue was completed.
Any questions about that?
Yeah, no, a comment. Rachel, can you just follow up at the end of the month with the customer?
Yes, and the resident did say he would inform me as well that he was going to keep us informed so that we could confirm.
History knowing these companies, they don't follow up too well sometimes.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
we just play a more proactive role. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You know, I just wanted to ask Rachel if you know what it means by when they're gonna split the signal or something like that. Does that double it, or does that just make it only half?
Well, they're splitting the signal from SCE, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
They're not splitting the Spectrum signal. It said SCE was what they told us.
I thought it was referred to, they were talking about splitting the Spectrum signal.
That's what I thought too.
Put it on, I think what they want to do is isolate different streets and neighborhoods, so when they get a problem, it's easier to track down.
Yeah, maybe the resident was the one that said SCE, and maybe he just misunderstood
It
it.
might be SCE's pole, utility pole. They may own the pole.
Probably.
Yeah, but my understanding was that it was Spectrum's feed. Okay. Okay, well, we don't have a cable company report, I assume.
Or
And now it's time for our student commissioner report. Rachel, do you have one?
I don't have anything at this time, but I just want to say thank you so much to everyone. I've really enjoyed being on this commission and learning from everyone. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, Rachel. We'll miss you, and good luck on your, I know you'll do just fantastically at college.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your interest.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you very much, Rachel. You did a terrific job.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay, let's
Thank
move
you.
on to our subcommittee reports. And the wireless subcommittee, I think we've pretty much exhausted for today.
Yeah.
Good job, you guys. Video, anything Brockman and Cassel Video Services Subcommittee?
Don't think so. No.
Okay. Programming Subcommittee, Weber, Sherman, Rosenblatt. We don't have anything more that I know of.
I
Right,
concur.
Richard? Huh?
Right.
Yeah. Are we going to be able to start up with the high school again? With school not being on campus? Yeah, it'll be interesting. Okay, a broadband subcommittee, Cassel and Melcher.
Nothing at this time.
Okay, thank you. The director's report.
Hi there. Well, the only thing really to report since our last meeting is we have a new website. The city's new website has come online, cityofcalabasas.com, of course, updating the very old, very dated website and a site that was not really designed to be used in a mobile environment, which in 2020, most people looking at the web are looking at it on phones and tablets, on mobile devices, rather than a traditional desktop computer. Much more mobile friendly, looks a lot better, functionality is light years ahead of what we had before, and so far a lot of very positive feedback for the new website. You have the items regarding smartphone app usage, the Granicus and YouTube usage by the public. As we mentioned before in past meetings, most of our video content is viewed on social media. It is viewed on the website. And if you look at views that we get through, Twitter, Facebook, Nextdoor, Instagram, thousands of video views each month. We just completed a little 30-second PSA on the new mask ordinance that went into effect yesterday, and it's gotten several thousand views already, just 5,000 on Facebook alone. So that's where you're seeing that's where you're seeing a lot of the video content now, rather than strictly on YouTube, let's say, or strictly the TV channel. You're seeing a lot of it going out through social media. And then upcoming events. Not a ton of events right now, of course, because of COVID-19. We do have a city council meeting coming up, next one coming up August 12th. So that's really about it.
A quick question on the city smartphone app, Michael.
Yeah.
Does that fall under your jurisdiction? There's just some problems with it that it malfunctions a lot. Something we can take up. We don't have to do it online, but does that fall under you or?
It's under the communications department, yes. And then
I'll talk to you about it.
Okay.
Okay, Arvin, are you ready for your programming report? Arvin? He looks frozen.
Been having issues
Yes,
with
I
his-
am. Whenever you. Oh, I'm sorry. I said yes. I don't know if you heard that, but I'll go ahead.
You were frozen.
Oh. Okay. I'd like to give you a quick update on our programming for since our last meeting in April till today. We continue doing our school boards twice a month. They took a little bit of June and early July off, and next one's next Tuesday, July 28th. So we're back to that regular schedule. Plenty of PSAs we've put up about CDC guidelines and health tips, and we've collected those from all around and disseminated that to the residents of Calabasas. When school was still in session, we did a series of 5 PSAs with the LVUSD teachers, different grades, and their information that they want to give to the parents and children. The library presents programs for children. We created a couple new ones and put those up. We started a new show called Calabasas.
Uh-oh, he froze again.
He's been having issues.
Files, which highlights Calabasas. Okay, I don't know how far we got, but sorry. We went out in early April to food drive. Also a Bay Laurel teacher parade in May we went out to. A few PSAs we got to sneak into the library, and we made some PSAs about, still you could order, you could call them and reserve books, pick them up. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm frozen or not, but I think.
No, you're okay, sir.
Okay.
All right. Also, a anniversary for the senior center was its 4th birthday in June, so we were able to collect photos, and we made a nice little program for them. As you know, the Race and Change community discussion.
Oh, you're frozen, Arvin.
A workshop via Zoom. I'm still going, hopefully, or am I frozen? Yeah, okay, we're good. CTV special was the tennis and swim center.
Oh, this is poor Arvin.
It's going to be our first 3-hour meeting.
Oh,
Oh, poor.
Safe to say it was just a lot of good stuff.
yeah.
Sorry. I don't know what it.
Summary.
Yeah.
Arvin, do we freeze when you freeze?
Yes, you.
Ah,
I wonder if he can see the chat while he's frozen, because I think it's counterproductive to keep doing this.
Yeah.
Point.
It's not on purpose. I guarantee.
I know, we know.
Yeah.
We do
Sorry.
we do have the information, and we can see a lot of the wonderful work you guys are doing. So are the camera crews going out? And he's frozen again. There he goes. No.
Yes. No. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So we keep promoting all this information. We'll keep the residents updated on any facility updates and mayor's letters and any information that's important regarding COVID and city facilities. And we do that through all our venues, social medias, e-news, the website, channel, and everything else. So continue keep updating, and you'll know more about meetings and upcoming events through our city website.
Thank you, Arvin. He's frozen again. I wonder what
The
kind of
channel and
internet.
all our social.
I wonder what kind of internet he has.
He has Spectrum, and he's going to complain about it. All right. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Arvin. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the great work you guys do.
Thank you.
It is.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I don't know whether you're still going to go into this or not. The list of where is it? Upcoming events or upcoming programs. I just want to touch on the election situation. In light of all that's going on with regard to the upcoming election, I would hope that we can figure out a way in which to promote as much as possible to the residents their means of getting their ballots as quickly or start. I mean, I don't know when it would be appropriate to start, maybe not until September, but at least keep the idea of trying to inform the residents about their ease of access of voting as much as we can.
very much so, Michael. I totally agree. Matter of fact, our team has already put together a logo that we're going to be using for the November election, and that'll be PSAs and stuff on the website, social media. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, but
And no matter when they start any kind of early voting, of course, all that will go out before then.
Yeah, I just want to make sure there's enough time to because it's going to be confusing and there's going to be so much chatter. So
You
the
betcha.
sooner we get that information on where it's still meaningful. So I'm sure not until after the summer, but shortly thereafter. Okay.
You bet.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else have anything? We've got a future agenda item of the update on the Calabasas radio station, AM 1630 low power emergency radio station, and a presentation on 5G. Was there anything else anyone wanted to put on that list, wish list?
Nope.
Okay. So, anything else anyone wants to bring up? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to the public that may be watching for joining us. We are now going to adjourn. The Communications and Technology Commission will adjourn to our next regular meeting on August 18th at 5 p.m., I assume via this same media.
What was the date again, Candace?
August 18th.
August 18th.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you, everyone. Great job.
Thank you.
Take care.
Night, everybody.
Aye. Good night.
Good night.